So a lot of what we are talking about this week revolves around the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK. There are many iterations of the KKK. So we live actually during the third or fourth iteration of the KKK. And what we're going to be talking about today is actually the first and second clans, the first and second Ku Klux Klans. So the first Klan is created in 1866. And it's initially a veterans organization for those who served for the Confederacy during the Civil War. And it's one of several veterans associations that were created in the South. Another example is Knights of the White Camilla, which was formed also in the South in Louisiana. So these were organizations in which people who had fought for the Confederacy joined together, and they were angry. They were really angry because after the Civil War, the Northern troops and what they saw as the Northern government, the United States government, really penalized the Confederacy and really penalized the Southern states. It didn't allow for them to have really any autonomy whatsoever. It didn't allow for them to have their own weapons. It didn't allow for them to have freedom of speech. It violated a lot of actually the constitutional rights that we take for granted today. And it did so saying, well, these are the consequences of war. So these veterans groups were really, really angry about that. But rather than taking their anger out on the US government, they turned their anger towards African Americans. And they said, well, if African Americans hadn't been here, things would have been fine. Everything would have been absolutely hunky-dory. It is all African Americans' fault that this whole thing began and that we are being penalized. So the Knights of the White Camilla and the Ku Klux Klan start to focus in on trying to punish, and that was how they saw it, to punish African Americans who they saw as being responsible for all of the woes in society. Now, in reality, I want to emphasize this, they were angry at the US government, but they knew that they couldn't do anything against the US government because that would have been sedition and they would have gotten in trouble for it. So they were trying to find a scapegoat and they targeted African Americans. So these groups, the most famous one is the KKK, and start a reign of terror in the South. The KKK is the one that grows in number, and it becomes known as the Invisible Empire of the South by 1870. The KKK targets African Americans who are trying to build a better life for themselves. And we talked a bit about this when we talked about the Jim Crow South. Now, the federal government during this time period was actually protecting African Americans. This is before Jim Crow, so this is still during Reconstruction. And the federal government said, okay, no, we're not doing this. We're not allowing a group of men who know what they're doing is illegal. And we know that they know what they're doing is illegal because they're dressed in robes and they're hiding their faces. So we're not going to let them get away with a terror on people's lives. And so the federal government passes a variety of laws. These are the Enforcement Acts and the Klan Acts. These laws declare that the first KKK is a terrorist organization. And this is really important because the KKK is no longer a terrorist organization. It is actually considered to be a political organization that is protected by freedom of speech and other groups. But in the 1870s, it was considered to be a terrorist organization. So the Enforcement Act and the Klan Act allowed the federal government and allowed troops and the police to hunt down members of the KKK and to imprison them without habeas corpus. So habeas corpus is telling someone why you have been arrested, and to punish members of the KKK for enacting terrorist acts upon African Americans. So the KKK is actually eradicated by 1872 because the federal government puts in a lot of funds into finding members of the Klan and into hunting them down, and says, okay, well, we're not going to put up with this at all. Now, there'll be other groups or there'll be individuals who enact violence on African Americans. But the KKK itself will have disappeared until 1915. The KKK revives itself in 1915 because of a movie. And I am kidding you not. It is literally because of a movie. Now, by 1915, discontent is growing in the South. We're going through an era of economic instability. We're going through an era in which African Americans are demanding civil rights. And every time that happens, there's going to be a backlash. That's just what happens. We're going into the World War I era. And people are saying, well, we shouldn't get involved in foreign wars. And people just don't like anyone who isn't like them. And that's not just true for the South, but that's true across America. That if you aren't like, that people believe that if you're not like me, there's something wrong with you. So there's a lot of discontent by 1915. But the scale that creates the KKK is quite literally, I'm not kidding, it is quite literally a movie called Birth of a Nation. And the movie was directed by D.W. Griffith. Birth of a Nation is based off a very long book called The Klansman. And it's not a well-written book. It's very long, it's very rambling. The Klansman idealized the KKK, and it idealized what life was like in the South before the Civil War. So it said the violence of the KKK was awesome, it said slavery was great, and it was a lot of Southern propaganda. Well, this was a bestseller in the South. So D.W. Griffith, this filmmaker, decides he's going to make it into a movie. Now, the film is over 3 hours long, and it was the longest film at the time. Most films at this time period were very short. They're maybe 10, 15 minutes long, maybe 30. They're very short. This is the era of silent films, so we don't have the talking pictures yet. And this is also the era where movies are just getting out there. People, they're not that expensive, but people would rather spend their money to go see an actual play or to get a record to listen to music. But Birth of a Nation is going to change all that. It became a blockbuster. It is the first blockbuster, quite literally, the first blockbuster out there. And it inspired the revival of the Klan. The movie tells the story of life in the South, and it tells the story of life before the Civil War and then after the Civil War. It suggests that life after the Civil War for white Southerners sucked because of the fact that African Americans were allowed their freedom. And it suggests that African Americans were not able to have their freedom, that African Americans were not human, that they were obsessed with power, they were obsessed with raping white women, and I'm not kidding, raping white women, and that something was needed to restore order to the South. And that restoration of order was the Klan. So, on the slide, I have 2 timestamps. I want you to click on the video and navigate to the 2 timestamps. The first timestamp shows one of the most controversial scenes, and it is the supposed rape of a young white girl. And you'll see how it goes through, and you'll know when to stop because she dies. So as you watch it, I want you to think about how the African American is portrayed in this scene. What is the message of the scene? Because this is a form of propaganda. Then I want you to stop, and I want you to go to the next timestamp. In the next timestamp, we have a young girl who is trying to get things better for her family, and so she goes to a mixed race person. And, well, you'll see what happens. So this scene is going to be a little bit longer, and you're just going to keep watching until The Klan has saved society. And and you'll know when you get to that point. So as you're watching, I want you to think about how African Americans are portrayed. And I want you to think about how the Klan is portrayed. You are going to need to have your audio on, obviously, because there's music that accompanies it, and that music is very important for the portrayal. Hopefully, once you've watched these scenes, you're going to understand the sentiment that people felt when watching the Klan, how they viewed the Klan, and why they thought the Klan was a great idea. I'm not kidding when I say that this movie inspired the rebirth of the Klan. I'm literally not kidding. The Klan develops not only in the South, but also in the North. This movie was shown in the White House, and the president at the time was a guy named Woodrow Wilson, who was a historian, who was a very bad historian. And he said, wow, this is amazing. Yeah, y'all got it right. And he promoted this film and said, yeah, what's going on is there. And people heard this and they're like, oh, if the president says it's good, it's obviously good. And this leads to the revival of the KKK and the Second Klan. The revived Klan, the Second Klan, is going to pop up everywhere. And unlike the first Klan, it will not be labeled a terrorist organization. Now, the revived Klan of the 19-teens to the 1920s is going to have a broader appeal to people. And that's because it is going to focus in not just on African Americans, though that is going to be a big aspect of the revived Klan, but it's also going to focus in on, well, as you can see from the image on my screen, America first, one God, one country, one flag. This is nationalism. It's going to focus in on patriotic nationalism. But what is key, and for us right now, what is very key to this, is the first one God. And you can see that is bolded, and you can see there are crosses. The Klan is going to appeal to a lot of people because it is going to promote the idea of a Protestant America. And I want to emphasize this, a Protestant America. So there are other groups of Christians in America, such as Catholics, and Catholics are Christians, but the Klan is going to say that the only true Christians are Protestants, and it is going to target any other Christian group. So the Klan will promote this idea of a Protestant America, and many people are going to think this is a great idea. There's going to be a level of anti-Semitism and anti-Catholicism, and these are sentiments that had been in America since the founding of America. But the Klan is able to kind of galvanize these sentiments, and it will lead to a lot of, what's the term I want to use? A revival of these sentiments, and the Klan is seen as very legitimate in the 1920s because of the fact that many people agree with the Klan on this. Now, many people also agree with the Klan on racial violence, but when they talk about the Klan, they're going to focus in on that top part, one God. And that is what we are going to focus most of our time on this week.